Walking was good. Was vacation at least good?
What's that?
You got mine in the third from the 25 color of the lawn. We
So this
didn't
is-
do these two. We have this left over.
So
We're
this,
gonna apply that to the 26 budget.
so this is the loan that we paid off early this year for Fredonia Ave. This is the remaining principal that we have. And so our recommendation is to carry over that principal into to next year or pay off down this loan. That's the one we just took out last year for 100K. So we'd use 67 of principal for this year that we have left over.
So we had that much, we're over that.
Surgery.
Yeah.
I know we were working on paying that off early.
Correct, yeah.
Probably shouldn't
So
even
that's
be
the
here.
benefit of doing that is now we have that
Yeah.
extra
Yeah,
principal.
she's.
Yeah.
Between the two of you.
That's a good place to be at.
I'm convalescing.
Sister-in-law just
Sorry,
had
if we don't have to
gallbladder
reduce the
taken.
levy by so much because we got that paid.
I mean, I guess you do until you borrow again. Which that'll be next year conversation.
That'd be 1,200 gold. That would kill.
Mhm.
My mom.
Yeah, that's good.
But I didn't know. And there was the prettiest orange, like, like a gemstone.
That's crazy.
She asked to keep it, but they wouldn't let her.
No, they usually don't. So disappointing. I had mass taken out of my back a number of years ago as a side of my bone. That's just like a fatty cyst, essentially, whatever. I was like, can I take that home? Okay, I want to show my dad. What for you? Like, doesn't matter. My dad will like it. They wouldn't even let me take a picture of it.
No fun.
Mhm.
One more minute. 30 seconds, really.
Figured I would lift it up because it doesn't fit nicely. I have to, I can lift it up.
I can sit here and take this one.
We'll make it a quick meeting. We'll make it go quick.
It's fine, Chris. I can miss you. I can one try it for another, try it not to do better.
Yeah, well, sure that, you know,
Okay. I feel like I can see what
So either my, there we go. All right, I got 6 o'clock. We'll get this meeting called to order. We'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Consent agenda, let's approve the minutes of the April. Is that right? October 28th. There we go. Meeting.
Whoops, that was yesterday. That should be August 20th.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Something wasn't right about that.
August 20th.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our August 20th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Call a vote. Everybody. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And all opposed? All right. Let's see, public comments, any comments not on the agenda? Nope. There's nobody else here, so we'll move on. Items for discussion and action. Let's see, public comments. Presentation of the draft 2025 budget. If Administrator Jenkins wants to take over.
Sure, I can. So I have a couple different copies for you. If you're a paper person, I printed off a paper copy. Otherwise, you should have it in your packet as well. Nothing has changed from the time that the packet went out to the paper copies that you have. First off, I want to give a big thank you to all of our staff. We started this process earlier this year than we did in years past. Beginning of summer with requesting CIPs, keeping all that stuff updated, keeping you guys apprised depending on the topic. So thank you to Melissa, the rest of our department heads, because that's all that effort has culminated in tonight and the draft budget that you see before you. So for those not familiar, I'll just give a recap of how our budgeting works. So we practice fund accounting, which means that everything that is in and out of a fund stays within that fund. So whenever you hear our auditor talk about fund balance, that's the leftover or the negative that from the prior year's incomes and expenses. So we have different funds, and that's how we'll go through this presentation tonight. I'll try to keep it high level, but if you guys have any questions about the nitty gritty, you want to get into the line items, we can as well. So on the first page, we look at the general fund. That's Fund 100. The first line item is our property tax levy. So it's the portion of the taxes that we collect and keep for ourselves. Something to note there, that 22% increase isn't just because we want to do it. That is the paramedic referendum. So supposing that it passes, that's why you see that increase there. If it were to not pass, then you would see that number would change to just our net new construction, which was only about 0.6% of an increase. Beyond that, the rest of our general property tax numbers remain the same. So you see a total of a 21% increase in our budgeted tax levy dollars. We're not planning anything for special assessments. So if you go on to intergovernmental revenues, you can see slight adjustments. If you remember with the recent act for 2023 that changed the calculation for state shared revenues, that is now tied to sales tax. So as presumably sales tax continues in the state of Wisconsin, all municipalities will see an increase to their state shared revenues. So we see that 2% bump reflecting that. Local transportation aids is tied to a calculation based on the last 3 years of road expenses. So we see a slight decrease based off of our last 3 years road expenses, but presumably with the recent construction that we've been doing, we'll see that number uptick in the coming years. Beyond that, the rest of the numbers remain the same until you get down to personal property aid. So again, part of the changes that happened at the state level is they took personal property aid off of the tax roll and instead are giving us a stipend to make up for those aids. And so that's why you see a bump from that 4,000 number to 12,000. So overall, it's a 10% decrease in intergovernmental revenues that we're planning on. One thing to note from a budgeting standpoint, just because it's a common frustration amongst local governments, is that a lot of these dollars we don't see until towards the end of the year, November. So we would love to say that, yeah, the state's going to give us all this aid and all this money right away, but we don't. We don't see it typically until towards the end of the year. Why that is, I don't know. If we move on to licenses and permits, you can see very little change in any of our budgeted permits and license revenues. The only one that we do expect an uptick is construction and building. So again, the industrial park, there should be construction going on next year, which will increase our planned income for those permit revenues. So I will pause there. Any questions on this first page?
I have a couple of,
Yeah.
well, just one, I guess, on the property taxes. Can you remind me, did we do an increase in the mill rate for property taxes for 2024 over 2023?
Did we do one? We did a natural one based off of net new construction. That's the one that we automatically get. But we didn't, like, you guys didn't pass a levy resolution to increase it anymore.
Okay.
No.
I
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Did we complete the process of putting the road that goes from the county road to the treatment plant on or getting ready for that?
Yes.
Then
Yep.
we surveyed it.
Yeah, that's already part of Whistler.
Okay.
Yep. You got it. All right, and then move on to the second page there, fines and forfeitures, that is expected to remain the same. And then under miscellaneous categories, we see a little bit of an uptick for the town reimbursement for my contract. Interest, we're projecting pretty conservatively. We would love to say we're going to get another 100K, but we don't know what the future might have. So we're budgeting a little lower there. Sales of equipment as Eric's department continues to get new stuff. we were going to presume that he's going to be selling less things. That's why you see that lower. Donations and gifts. So this is meant to reflect that any recreational donations and gifts that we ask for next year, you'll see on the expense side, there is a recreational expenses as well. So those are kind of meant to or balance each other out. And that's the same thing with recreational revenues. That's any drink sales and things like that we might be doing throughout the year is meant to balance our expenses on the recreational side. So overall, you see a slight decrease in our miscellaneous. And at the end of our general fund budget, we see a 9% total increase in our general fund income. All right. Now you might ask, what are we going to spend all this money on? Well, that is what's next. So we got expenses here. General government, again, is a very generalized bucket. So you see village board wages going to actuals. Same thing with expenses. You see the adjustments for admin, clerk, treasurers, and staff. Office supplies, you see a big decrease. That was mainly to technology and the other ordinance updates and things like that we did this year. We have less of those costs moving forward. Moving on to election expenses, we should only have one election next year. So we have those expenses going down too. Well, it might be two if there's a primary, but hopefully only one election next year. Then you see our assessment contract. That's a big savings there. So again, we did a reval this year. That's what upticked that cost. We're going back to a non-reval year. So that's why that's lower. You see our normal expenses for hall maintenance, utilities, good things like that. Technology and equipment, that's a line item that's fluctuated a lot as we've gotten used to things like our website expenses and our email and things like that. I just wanted to detail what that line item has, because that's been questioned in the past. So for that, we have about 5,000 for our website, 4,200 for the archiving that we're required to do. Our copier is 150 a month. And then it gives us some wiggle room for new office computers within the office itself. So that's what you see with that 15.3. Moving down to insurances, so that's the municipal insurance and workers' comp. We're doing something different next year. So typically our entire municipal insurance and workers' comp policy all hit the general fund, which doesn't necessarily make sense because the insurances that we have cover all of the funds of the village, the water utility, the sewer utility, the fire department, paramedic fund, and whatnot. So we worked with our insurance provider to find out what percentage of that full amount belongs in each category, and it's now spread out amongst each of the funds. So that's why you see such a decrease in the municipal insurance and workers' comp line items. All right, so then moving on, I'm sorry, at the end of general government, you see a total decrease of 17%. Moving on to public safety, this is mainly just the marshal's office, so there's not too much of adjustments here. You see a slight uptick for training and uniforms and repair and maintenance of some items. Other than that, nothing too much of note. I'll note that in this year's budget, we will probably come under budget because I believe there's 2 positions that remain unfilled within the marshal's department. But Marshal Leach is planning on filling those positions next year, which is why you don't see a change. All right, before we get into public works, are there any questions on the first 2 categories?
Fire department cleaning, 250%.
Yep. So all of the DPW categories, which this is one of them, anything that you see kind of italicized is a DPW category. That is based off of the full cost of all of our DPW payroll and divided off by a percentage of their time spent working there the previous year. So this is a rough guesstimate, and you can already see 2024 versus the 9-month actuals. They were spending more time cleaning the fire department. That's what that line item is for. And so based off of that time allocated, we took their full amount and divided it out, and that's how you get that 2021 that's there. Yeah. Yeah, it's any time that the DPW staff spends there.
Our attorney fees are up
Mm-hmm.
over, our budgeted amount versus what we actually spent in 2024 so far are over. Are we sure the increase for next year is enough based on what we're doing right now?
Yeah, and mainly we feel like we're going to be using this when we review our ordinances more. We're going to be doing more of that throughout next year. And so every time that we update an ordinance, obviously it goes through attorney review, and that's what that 12,000 is meant for. I mean, I feel comfortable with that number. If you wanted to kick it up a couple, you could. But I'd probably keep it at that amount for now. We can always do mid-year adjustments if we're going crazy.
And then small things like the hall phone,
Mhm.
we've got what, $147 left for the rest of the year. Is that enough for 2 months worth of phone service? And does that need to increase for next year? It's not a big amount, but
Yeah, so this year we changed our phone provider, so which will result in savings on a month-to-month basis.
Okay.
So we didn't capture that this year because we did it in the middle of the year. But once it normalizes, we have a full year of those savings, and yes, it should go back down to that 2,500. All right, should we get to Eric's favorite category? All right,
Big spender.
so we'll move on to Public Works here. So again, the equipment highway equipment wages and all that, that's based off that formula that we talked about. Equipment maintenance, so that's that line item that anytime something breaks down, we use. So again, we would hope that as we get newer things, we're doing less replacements, we'll have less equipment maintenance costs, right, Eric? So that's why you see a slight decrease there. Moving down the line here, you see our basic maintenance costs for the shop itself. Shop maintenance kicked up a little bit. I believe there's a garage door repair and a few other items that he plans on tackling next year within the shop itself. All right, moving down, you see more payroll items. So I'll get to street maintenance and maintenance supplies. So if you remember, last year's budget was the first time that we allocated 50K towards street maintenance. During the mid-year adjustments, we were able to bump that up and do a little bit more work. So again, 50K is our benchmark. We want to spend at least 50,000 on our road maintenance stuff. Public Works Committee has looked at that list that gets generated from Whistler system on a variety of things that we can work on, and Eric has that list as well. And then in addition, you'll see it's the first year that we have a sidewalk maintenance line item as well. And so again, back in spring, we talked about working with that company and doing an inventory of our sidewalk, moving from the east side of the village to the west side of the village and updating those sidewalk pieces as we can. That's the startup money to do that. Does that make sense? Okay. We have more wages, we have snow removal, street lighting, more wages. There's an uptick in the storm sewer expenses. And actually, Eric, would you mind touching on that alleyway and the stormwater stuff you have planned?
So we have one alley in the village here, which is, you want to call it right across from Park Street, the fire department there. The alley that would go between Francis Schimberg's and run just south of St. Rose there, their playground parking lot. That is ours.
Yep.
When that storm sewer was put in, how many years ago? It's popped up now, so it's beveled in the middle of the road. I'd like to fix that next year. Because now Francis, that's been maintaining it, he is moving. So. And since it's ours, like the property.
Makes
So
some
that is
sense.
the only alley to knowledge and record that is in the village, which is.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Moving on to garbage and recycling, that's an annual uptick of 4% that you see listed there. And then the various other wages for a DPW crew as adjusted. So we'll move on to parks. As we've recognized this year, we've been significantly doing more in our parks. And so this is helping us to capture that we're putting that extra work in there. So you see significant increase in our wages just because more hours and time were spent in our parks. The maintenance of the parks, those line items remain roughly the same. The park repair and maintenance, that's the actual line item where if we're fixing a playground or doing another update, That's the 35K that you see allocated there. This is another line item where it started off lower at the beginning of the 2024 budget. We were able to uptick it when we moved some monies around. And now that 35,000 still is an increase from the 2024 approved budget. Then you see various other payroll, and then it ends with village events. So again, that's that line item that I talked about where we'll have 15K that's offset by the income coming in on the revenue side to spend on village events of all kinds. Which one? Because we're not doing a gigantic thing. I mean, we could allocate more dollars towards it, but.
But we're still doing fund before,
Mhm.
that can be much different than.
There'll be fundraising and everything done for Fun Before the Fourth and all the other events, Madonia, things like that. So we'll still have fundraising dollars that'll come in to help offset those costs.
I think the emphasis is that they wanted to do more fundraising for those type of events that we did this year.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. So right now it balances. If we end up getting more money than what we budgeted for income, then that's great. So. Yeah, but I see what you're saying. All right. And then finally, we end with our little conservation and development. This is our little marketing category that we use occasionally. And then we have our fund transfers. So this is anytime that we're transferring from the general fund to one of our other funds. So we have our reserve or contingency that you hear me call it. That's us literally saving for a rainy day. After we collect the first round of tax dollars, we take 50K, we stick it into LGIP and then forget about it. So that way it earns interest and we have it in case we need it. Then we have our capital projects. So that's 93,500 that's allocated to the CIP fund for all the CIP stuff that you guys have already approved. The fire department stipend, that's the amount that the fire department fund needs in order to balance. So that takes the 110,235 from the general fund to the fire, which we'll see a little bit later. And then finally, it's the first year of the paramedic stipend. This is our portion of the paramedic fund that we're contributing to the entire paramedic program. Which again, don't get too excited. This 100K here is offset by grant dollars next year. Next year, it will be closer to that 200K number. And so then at the end here, you see the total, that's a 3% increase. And you'll notice at the end, there's, oh, Chris, there's 89,000 still there. So this was kind of what we talked about when we last met at finance. And we said that, well, this year, if the paramedic referendum passes, we're accepting the 200K levy. We know we're going to have an extra amount of dollars since we're going to be using grant dollars next year. This is that extra amount of dollars. So there's a couple strategies that we can use for these dollars. That maybe we'll just end our full conversation with, because that's one of the things that I want to ask you all about. So just make note that we'll circle back on that. So that's the general fund. I promise you that's the longest one. So next up is the CIP fund. So again, none of these items have changed. It's all the CIP stuff that you guys had recommended and the village board approved. This is just how we put it into the line item buckets. So I don't think you need me to go over this, but it's all the same stuff that you had approved before. Anything you want me to go into detail about?
Parks grant, what was that about?
Which one?
The parks grants? For 200,000? Fourth line.
Oh, that's the splash pad.
Okay.
That's all the income from
Okay.
the splash
Just
pad
wanna make sure.
would go through there.
Wasn't something.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. So when we get reimbursed from Friends of Fredonia, it would hit that account. Anything else? Okay. Next is our debt service fund. So this is for general obligation debt. So this is debt that we pay with taxes as opposed to debt that we would pay through like a water utility or sewer utility. So we have a couple debts that are here. Let me just pull that up. We have debt through Associated Bank for the fire department construction. We have debt through Baird for a portion of the CIP industrial park work that we did last year. And then we have a small amount of debt from the Commissioner of Public Lands. That was the 106,000 for the skid steer and pickup that we did. So in total, we have a couple numbers here. The actual debt that we need to levy onto the tax roll is only 260,000. So you see the prior year was 255. 260 is how much we'd actually be collecting on taxes. where you'll note that we have extra money. Look at my little asterisk down here at the bottom. So Fredonia Ave, we had a loan for Fredonia Ave reconstruction. That was able to get paid off early, thanks to our predecessors who were paying down the principal over numerous years. Because they did that, in this year's budget, we have an extra $67,684 of principal levy. So our recommendation is to take that amount, let it roll over into fund balance, and then use that next year. And the way I would recommend you use it is you pay down that little loan that's only 106,000. And we can get that sucker paid off much sooner than we had planned. And by doing that, it'll give us the breathing room that when I'm sitting here in front of you guys a year from now, talking about our next 2-year debt plan, we'll have that breathing room to do that without going to the taxpayers for more money that they don't need to pay. So that's why you see that uptick from 255 to 328 that adds those additional revenues. And then finally, there's a premium on debt, part of our borrowing that we did this year. We were given an extra premium on rate that some of you might remember. So that is a 1-year kind of income that we get to utilize. And so then on the expense side, you see the normal amount that we pay down plus 67,000 plus interest. And that's what that all totals. So it's a lot of information, but that's our debt.
A certain amount of time to make those adjustments in the debt service. You don't have to drop the debt service immediately. You can build up a debt hole that you're going to purposely use for a specific project.
Are you saying if we didn't spend the 67 and we let it roll into the fund balance? Yeah, you could. But the sooner we pay off the debt, the sooner we're saving on the interest rate of the debt that we have now. I don't know if that makes sense, but. Does this body have any other questions on debt? All right. Then we get to the fire department. So the fire department on the income side, you see our fire dues remain the same. There's a slight uptick in the contract we have with Wabaca. Saukville, and the chief can share more if he would like. Saukville has rescinded their contract as they're going with another provider. So we lose out on that income that we would have been getting. We keep going down. Interest, a lot of this interest, and arguably it's probably at zero, but a lot of this interest was based off us banking the grant dollars as long as we did. You'll see that all of our dollars for the paramedic program are going to get shifted to an actual paramedic fund. So all of the, arguably the revenue, the interest revenues that we'd be getting are going to stay within that paramedic fund. So the only interest that the fire department would be getting is if and when we create a LGIP account for fire capital, then the little bit of interest that they would get would hit this fund. But that hasn't happened yet. So for now, it's zero. And that's the same thing with gifts and grants. You see that huge amount of gift and grant dollars. That's the paramedic grants that we had. It's not getting utilized in the fire fund. That's why it's zero. The rest of the contracts remain the same. The ambulance income is always kind of our best guess, best estimate. The chief had looked at the last 3 years, I think it was, the ambulance income and did some math, and that's how we got that rough 200K that we're expecting. And then finally, there's that transfer from the general fund that I talked about earlier. So that shows an income then of 351,000. On the expense side, the fire department has a lot of updates and maintenance things to their trucks that they need to get done next year. And so if you have any questions about that, I'm sure the chief can speak to it. You see various repair and equipment maintenance items, building maintenance, uptick for fuel that gets utilized, gas. You see that insurance, again, that's their portion of the insurance that we talked about before. Our general utilities that they have, office supplies, volunteer wages. And moving on to the next page, we have our LOSA payment, non-capital small equipment costs, some decreases in inspection salaries and whatnot. You'll notice that the fire chief, don't get too excited. We're not giving him a complete wage cut. Sorry. We're again allocating half of that to the paramedic program. You see our AMT salaries and insurance, training, various line items here. If you remember last year, there was a point of contention with what is now called the annual banquet line item. That was before just a general donation line item that went to the association. And there was some heartburn about, well, why is the village giving a nonprofit, in this case, those donated dollars? So this makes it clear that it goes to just fund that annual banquet that they hold, and that's our contribution towards that banquet. It's us, giving them that gift, so to speak. We see our pumper truck lease that we continue to have, ambulance utilities, their wages, our portion of the billing service that we have, and then finally ambulance fuel and training. So if there's any questions with that, that's why we have the fire chief here to answer the hard questions.
Not hard questions. You want to elaborate on the Saukville contract?
Saukville contract, that was for fire service to the area from Meadowlark to the south down to the river. Since the formation of the County Central Fire Department, which is the merger of Saukville, Crackle together. They were tight on their budget numbers, and they decided that they were going to take the money that they were giving us and giving Wabigo, because Wabigo had an area of that, and Newburgh Fire Department had an area. They're taking all that money back. They're using that money to try to balance their budget of
Okay.
new department.
I saw they pulled Newburgh. I wasn't sure about
Bad
the others.
service to those residents that are down there, because they're gonna, Saukville's gonna have to come all the way around, or that new fire department's gonna have to come all the way around and come in, but, that's part of the contracted business. So we had this happen to us a couple of years ago when Wabigo would not give us a increase to their portion that we were covering for them. They would just take area back. They used to have Crystal Springs, and they just took Crystal Springs back to their, that they served. So, it's we'll see how the residents down there feel about it. So that's kind of what's happening.
Got some other questions. What about, where'd it go? The miscellaneous line that we don't have anything budgeted for 2025 and expenses.
This year, I think I did more detail and we categorized stuff a little bit different, so
Okay.
there shouldn't be ever anything in miscellaneous. I mean, it should be categorized into one of the accounts that we have, so. And we actually, what I did was take it right down to zero and went back on 23's numbers and 24's numbers. And that's how I got we used to do this. In the past, it was just the percentage of increase, and that's what we kept on going. And this year, I actually did details of what I spend on this account.
Okay.
Is it legit? So, and miscellaneous, we don't need to have that.
Good. That's always good. Ambulance income fees.
Yes.
Is projected, totally understand that. What would you say, what do we actually take in versus what we bill?
Yeah, we're working on that. We're waiting for a report from our billing company to give us a percentage. 30 to 50% what we bill, I would say. The Medicare, Medicaid calls are absolutely terrible. Any person that has Medicare and Medicaid, we can bill them $1,500, maybe get $350 bucks for that. So we end up eating a lot of that. We had asked Megan from EMC, which is our billing company, to provide us some detail on that, and then also paramedic numbers, and we still don't have that.
How do we combat that? Is there anything we can do to?
Medicare, Medicaid is.
I mean, I know
there's
Medicare,
there's stuff
Medicaid
with Medicare,
is
Medicaid.
what it is, but to
It's a
hear,
contract, and that's it. So,
you know,
we do bill patients to the private payers, so, the private payers, so the Blue Cross Blue Shield, and all that, we do bill the patient, whatever's remaining. We still end up writing a bunch of that off.
why?
They go to collection, the company works for collection, they have a 30, 60, 90-day collection, and then after that, it's right off.
It's a shame.
Mhm.
That's a lot of money out the window.
It is.
You also could try to counter it by increasing, our rates, which we did for the first time January since for the 5 years. I think.
Karen, how many more payments we have in
No, that's 62, we only got 2 more years left. That's $68,000.
Of yards, or we have a balance to pay?
No, that is ours.
It is ours.
Yeah, it was 8 equalized payments of $68,000 each year. I believe we're going to be, this is year 6, I believe that.
Yeah, you listed payment 5 or 6.
That's exactly, I did say, it. That was my question, because I was gonna ask. That was something too that we tried at the time because we didn't have the ability to take a loan for it, so we did a lease to own option. Was that a smart option? We'll have to talk about that when it comes time to look at another new one.
Yeah, at least we got one. Yeah, I like the way you have everything spread out and then it's on under phone number and whatever. Because that'll probably keep to a minimum the contesting of certain numbers or whatever, when we have a quarterly or there's a payback or whatever. You know, everything will be down there, I mean, that's been miscellaneous and follow up everything, so. I appreciate that.
All right. So speaking of which, we'll move to paramedic, which I just realized that the subcategories are still labeled fire, so I'm going to fix that. All right, on the income side for the paramedic, this is where we're seeing the revenues, the intergovernmental revenues from all 4 municipalities hitting that line item. You see us utilizing the grant dollars that we have, so that is the 474 total in income. On the expense side, you see some familiar categories, some new ones that we've created over the years. We've been kind of fleshing out this program. So a bulk of it is the wages and benefits of our paramedics, medical supplies, uniforms, vehicle insurance, and then that paramedic capital line item, which again is for the build out of the fire station. You've seen this budget before. It's the one that you guys approved 2 meetings ago, but if there's any questions on that.
Why do we have $0 in the paramedic training? $0 in paramedic training?
It's also like the last.
Okay.
So the only reason I had paramedic training in there in the beginning of the program, because I thought we'd have to start up from scratch and actually send somebody to school, hire somebody with education, and the hospital provides.
Okay.
Continuing education.
I feel like I've asked them that like 3 times too, Tiffany. So it's okay.
I apologize.
Yeah.
I know. I look
Yeah.
at it, I'm like, wait a second.
They don't need training.
We got new employees here.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to the TID. So the TID is estimating 125,000 in tax revenues from those developments within there. Again, you see that personal property aid, that's that new aid amount that we get from the state for those developments. And then debt issuance credits, again, that's that one-time issuance credits that we have from the giant borrowing that we did earlier this year. So that's on the income side. On the expense side, compared to this year, where you see a lot of expenses, this year we have very little. We're just paying our debt, and we have a little bit of accounting and auditing costs there as we audit that account. You'll note that at the bottom here, we should end with a positive amount of monies, which again just rolls over to the fund balance to help fund the TID as we move closer to that ticking clock that we have. Any questions on that? All right, so we get into the water utility. The water utility sees very little change. The rates, 1, are not recommended to change, and 2, cannot change because you guys just did a simplified rate increase last year and you can't do that multiple years in a row. So the rate amounts all stay the same and the revenues that are from that. You'll notice that there's 2 changes when it comes to interest and water tower rent. Because as the public now knows, the village approved that agreement with TowerPoint to sell those leases. We won't see that water tower rental income, but we will see an increased interest as that money sits there in LGIP and generates interest for the water utility. So that's what's reflected here. And then finally, you have another one-time item of the debt issuance credits that we get for our borrowing that we did. On the expense side, we see our depreciation fund is again the rainy day fund. That's the amount of money that we stick into LGIP and save for a rainy day. We have various amounts for the wages, for the water utility, the power, chemicals, supplies. Very little of that remains changing. We have a slight decrease in repair costs. Increases to contractual services. That's where you see the 19K that you guys just approved for the water tower. Previously, we were contracting more stuff out. That is now absorbed in that contractual services line item. You see their portion of the insurance. We have a little bit of capital project items for this from the CIP, and then their payments of the principal and interest debt that the water utility owes. And that all balances out just fine. Any question on water?
On the water income,
Mhm.
the transfer in for 438,000. Can you elaborate on that one?
In this year's budget in 2024,
Yeah,
that was our debt proceeds that we transferred in.
okay,
Yep. Mostly to pay for Highland.
okay.
So where are we storing the money that we get from Swanson?
Say it again. It would be stored, once we get it, it'll be stored in the water utilities, their own LGIP fund.
Will be its own line? Okay.
Well, it won't be its own line, but it'll be part of the water, what is that called? The water replacement capital fund.
Is that gonna have its own line or is it going to the depreciation fund?
It would, well, the interest that's earned off of that money, that's what's showing on the income side. The actual 1 million we don't have budgeted for in this. We might get it this year as just it's an extra win for the water utility. We might get it next year regardless. We're not going to count on that money. We're not going to be spending that money, right? It's just going to be in there as put it into our reserves.
What is that? Is that what you said?
Should be $1 million that you guys approved. Mhm. Any questions on water? All right, and we have the lab fund. So a bit of history, because I know that Jess is new. So the lab fund is a fairly new program for us that started with Eric coming on in 2023. And we used ARPA dollars to kind of start this up, to fund the initial equipment, the licensing and all that, in the hopes that we'd be able to generate income and revenues for this fund and for the village overall. So you could see that first year of 2023 was pretty expensive. The incomes we weren't quite sure about. And then in 2024, we budgeted more incomes than expenses, which looks like it's going to be true. And then now we're getting into more of a rhythm of what those incomes and costs are going to be. So municipal revenues are whenever we contract or work with another municipality and we test their samples. And then residential revenues is when, somebody from the town might come in and say, please test my water. And that's the 22K that you see there. On the expense side, we have various chemicals, supplies, certifications, and equipment that we need to keep up with in order to be able to do the testing. So again, you see this budget balancing. Best case scenario, we keep getting different clients and municipalities to work with us, and then that income will continue to increase. We did toy with allocating payroll costs to this. So one of the things that the auditors talked to us about was whether to do that or not, and how we recognize the savings for the sewer utility. Because before us having a lab, the sewer utility and the sewer itself would have to pay an outside service or a contractor to test the stuff for us. So yes, so because we're doing that in-house, we wanted to recognize that savings. So we could either do that by showing the sewer utility paying the lab and getting all the benefits of the income. But if we did that, we have to be actual with our expenses, which means, it just costs payroll and people time to do that. So if we didn't want to deal with that hassle, which we agree simplifies everything, then on the sewer side, we just have less of an expense. So you'll see that on the sewer side, there's just less expense in contracting services because we're able to do that stuff in-house, if that makes sense. Okay.
So we won't do that in particular, so we will do that in general expense. This is what it would cost us to have to move with.
Yes, I mean, we don't recognize it on our books, right? It's not like the sewer utilities that be paying the lab $5,000 for the testing. We're just gonna be doing it and it's gonna be a wash. Instead of one having to pay the other. Yeah. All right. So speaking of sewer, you'll see on the income side, as you all know, the Public Works Committee reviewed their recent recommendations for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And they had a study, we had a study done by Ellers. Both of those presentations will be coming to the board, I believe, the second meeting in November. But out of that meeting, they had recommended doing an increase to our sewer rates of 20% to prepare for that upgrade. So that's what you see reflected here. For some context, the board, that committee was also told that even if we didn't do the upgrades, our rates are still off by about 17%. So whether you want to continue with the 20 or not, even if you didn't continue with the 20, I'd still probably recommend doing the 17, just because Ellers showed us, and maybe Jess or Don can speak to it, that even if we weren't doing the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, our books still don't balance. It's still not, we still don't have a comfortable margin. And so they recommended sewer rates increase. All that to be said, this is just a budget. These are just placeholder numbers. Nothing goes into effect until a resolution is passed by the village board. President Gerke, I believe the second meeting in November, we're going to have those presentations again to kind of update everybody on what that process is going to be. And you guys might decide to act in March to increase the rates. So just know that just because this says 20%, it doesn't mean it's 20% right now, because it's not until the full board takes an action. So if you want to, as a finance committee, recommend changing this number, you can. But I just want you to have that context of why it says 20% there. Moving forward on the rest of the income, you don't see too much change there. We have the use of debt funds for the capital projects that we're doing. And again, that debt issuance credit that is noted there. On the expense side, you see a pretty significant uptick in our depreciation fund, mainly because if we're going to be increasing rates, we're going to be pocketing money for a while as we prepare for a wastewater treatment plant upgrade. Beyond that, you just see slight increases and changes for our payroll costs for the sewer utility, fuel and power, chemicals and supplies, and various equipment like that. The outside services here, that 80K going from 100K to 80K, that's what I was talking about with the lab. So because we're contracting out less work, it's saving us on the expense side for the sewer utility. You see that insurance line item getting added in there, and then the various miscellaneous items that are below. Does that make sense? And I guess your next question would be, are you comfortable with the 20% in the budget for income?
I don't love it, but I think it's needed. I sat in the Public Works meeting and listened to the presentations and reviewed the numbers with everybody else. And if we're not balancing, we're gonna make a change.
And it's one way or another, we have to do 17% just to balance. And if we want to do a update to the sewer system, we're gonna have to get the money someplace.
Yep.
It's not pleasant, but
Say it again.
You're already gonna start out with 3/4 instead of 4/4, and the 20%.
Yeah, so if you did the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, that 20% is just the first of a 3-year increase. So 20%, 20%, and 20%. So just to prepare yourselves. That's a gradual increase instead of, 70% all at once.
don't want to throw what we've done, what Eric has said on a few other communities that have done 100% to 60% immediately because they have to,
Mhm.
which is not good either.
Any further questions on that? All right. Then I'm just going to jump back to the general fund and kind of how we started. The general fund currently has that extra 89,000 that we would be collecting in revenues. We talked a little bit last time about whether to pocket all that money into our general reserves, to put it towards some sort of paramedic reserves for when something might happen, and or to pay down debt. I think that you guys have an opportunity to do a little bit of both. What I would recommend out of that 89 is that if you remember that skid steer pickup debt that we have outstanding principal of a little less than 100K. We'd be allocating already 60 some of that in that debt fund towards that. I'd recommend using that 89 just to pay off the rest of that debt. That way that's off of our books. And when we're dealing with our next round of debt, we have that breathing room to do that. And then the remaining dollars, which is still going to be, 60-ish thousand dollars, then that could go towards a paramedic reserve fund to, again, keep stockpiling and saving for a rainy day. Yeah, you can go to whatever you want. It's general fund income, correct?
What are you looking at? 10 years before we need the ambulance or less?
10 years less, 18, 4 years.
And that's a $400,000 or $500,000.
Well, let's go back to the fund with the referendum. So referendum goes through, we're doing 200,000 a year.
Yep.
This first year we needed how much?
100,
cover?
about 200.
Well, how much do we need for the second year? The full
Well,
200,
exactly.
and then the third year is when we would have to start dipping into something different.
But eventually, I see down the road that we're gonna have everything dip into.
Yeah.
That 200,000 is not gonna be enough, maybe in year 6.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah, at some point you go over that. What you're.
Yeah, and the intention of,
Okay, I got the actual numbers here. So assuming that we budgeted correctly and everything works out the way that we wanted to, which is a big if. Next year, we need 100K. 2026, we need 177. 2027, it's 186. In 2028, you're getting close to that 200 number. So in a sense, that kind of extra breathing room that you see here, we'll probably have a little bit of that next year, right? And maybe a little bit left the year after that. Because keep in mind, whatever that 200K number is, it also increases by net new construction year after year. But so our costs also go up, right? So it's kind of a give and take.
Then we'll also have revenues from the paramedic that could offset that cost. Not a lot, but it should offset that.
Yeah, the revenue should be going up at some rate.
my only concern with utilizing those funds to pay off something that is not EMS or paramedic or fire department related is just that. The optics of it, we're asking the community for all this money to pass this referendum. My opinion is it should be saved to be utilized for something like the fire department and EMS. I'm good with paying the 67,000 or whatever we had left over towards the skid steer, but I don't think we should be dipping into this fund to pay for that. To pay that off. I totally understand the finances behind it and all of that, but one person gets wind of what that money is being spent on instead of banking it for future years, and it's going to be very, very ugly.
Good.
So then, let me go back to that. So then your recommendation then is to take that 89 amount that we had left over. It would get added to the paramedic stipend transfer line item. And then in the paramedic fund. It would, in a sense, hit the, call it intergovernmental revenues line item as an additional amount that we've transferred. And then we, in a sense, would create another line item as we do for all of our funds that says contingency, right? And we'd earmark that into contingency for the specifically the paramedic fund.
That would be my recommendation.
My favorite, that's true, that's what we mentioned in the meetings.
Agreed.
Okay. Yes, Melissa?
I'm just trying to. Because we have to present a budget to all the other communities, we don't want our contingency to offset that budget. So this is,
You should put on the fire side.
this is the budget you're presenting to the other communities, you don't want
Yeah, that's a good point.
that extra.
It's gonna
money there
intermingle.
to Benefit Belgium, the town,
Should show them in 350 top out, right?
so it's got.
Yeah,
Held. Somewhere not in that budget, does that make sense?
If it comes from somewhere else.
That paramedic budget.
It's for us to help with the paramedic budget, but not overall,
Yeah.
all four communities.
But that's just.
Yeah.
Right.
I gotcha.
Yeah, we can use whatever our portion of what to do. If they are portion of it. But,
Right, but you want to keep our portion out of that.
that shouldn't be paid in that. That's
Right.
all I'm saying, that's all.
Yeah, because the overall referendum was based on projections, including, the other
Right.
income, so theirs shouldn't change just because our first year is over, because our seventh year is gonna be under.
So Belgium might collect more too, but they're not gonna show it in this. We're the only ones that have to create the budget to show that. We
Yeah.
just have to-
Yeah.
So that 89 should be somewhere over here, not.
Right,
not here.
Yeah.
So if you transfer to the fire fund, 350.
Fire fund, please, yes, thank you.
Got it.
I mean, you could. Put it, not a certain.
Well, we were gonna create that LGIP thing for fire anyway, for the 100K that you're allocating, so that'll just get added on top. Cool. Well,
As long as we
that's,
don't lose track of it.
so then that's it. Again, our next steps are the public hearing notice, all that has gone out. It'll be in the paper this week and next week. The first meeting in November, I'll present a very high level version. I'll present a very high level version of this budget to you all. I'll have a little PowerPoint presentation for the public. You're gonna get both my fancy book that I give you with all the fluff, and you'll get these line items in front of you too. And then you'll have 2 weeks to mull it over, ask more questions of myself, department heads and staff. And then the second meeting in November is when we'll hold a public hearing and then approval of the official levy and adoption of the budget. So. Cool. And Tiffany, in case you're gonna ask, were you gonna ask about what if the referendum doesn't pass? 'Cause I was waiting for that question.
Well, that's gonna come next, but
Okay.
my first question would be, how do you have this stored? Is this in an Excel file or is it in a computer program? And can you add page numbers to this printed out form, please?
Sure, this was actually on in Excel and then I printed it off and then we scanned it and that's why you don't have page numbers, but yes. You can do that for
I
you.
tend to lose track sometimes, so it'd be great if we could do that, so. And yes, what happens when the paramedic, if the paramedic referendum does not.
So two things. One, obviously the property tax levy and revenue that you see there would not be that. It would be much closer to what our 2024 number was. That'll throw off the general fund budget, a little bit, but not too much. And then on the paramedic fund, you'll see a dig into reserves. I mean, we have to fund the program. And I'm sure as soon as the next day, when it doesn't pass, then I'm calling the fire chief and we're getting the 4 municipalities together. And we're gonna have some serious talks, because if the municipality that is hosting the program is not able to pass our referendum to fund it, then, I would be worried about the success of the program moving forward, but.
So what happens if the town
Mhm.
doesn't pass or Belgium doesn't
Yeah,
pass?
I mean, they all have the same commitment in that agreement to fund it regardless. So if the town of Fredonia wouldn't, they would have to offset it some other way.
Same thing we would have to do essentially.
But say Belgium
Mhm.
offsets it for a year and then says, we need to get out of this because we have to get out, we can
Still gotta stand here for 5 years.
Yeah, well, that's why I think if any of the 4 municipalities fail, I mean, that's gonna be an immediate, we'll have to get together and figure it out, yeah.
Could be disastrous.
Just thumb in the wind, you know, listen to the public over the last couple of weeks. I don't feel like it's gonna fail, but.
I also want to be prepared.
Oh,
In
yeah,
case it does.
absolutely. I mean, even the school board passed 2 budgets.
Yep.
Based on pass or fail of their referendum.
We did ask Ellers about that, if we needed to do that too. And they said they recommended just posting one notice, creating one budget and just a wait and see, which is why, again, we're kind of later in the game than we would normally be in an annual year. By this point, you guys would have approved the budget and we would have been done,
Mhm.
so.
No, all on Tuesday.
Yep.
Did either of the towns pass their yet?
Not yet, tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow is the town of Fredonia's electors meeting.
I don't know when Belgium's is or
I
else.
don't know Belgium's,
Is that here tomorrow night?
Yeah.
What time?
7:30,
Something's at 7.
budget hearings at 7, electors meetings at 7:30.
So when you want to hear about this thing, you should be here at 7.
No, it's 2 different things. So the electors meeting is when they're talking about increasing the levy. That's the only thing on the agenda. So you have to be a resident of the town, a resident and elector of the town to come to that meeting and voice your opinion.
What if you just want to come to the meeting and not voice your opinion?
You can come.
Anybody comes.
Mhm.
It's just like our meetings.
Just wanted to be clear.
You come, but you can't say anything.
You come and get frustrated and bite it.
All right, thank you Administrator Jenkins for that thorough presentation. We've had a little bit of discussion, so if we're finished with the discussion, I guess we'd be ready for a motion to approve, to recommend it to the village board as amended.
I'll make a motion to recommend the 2025 draft budget as amended to the Village Board of Trustees.
Second.
All in favor?
All right,
Aye. Motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
I don't believe we have any correspondence. I haven't been presented with any. Items for future consideration by the finance committee. Other than. It's obvious.
There's about 8,000 of them.
All right, if none, then we are in order to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Good job.
Go back to bed. I hope you feel better soon. Yeah.
Good night, Jessica.